Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. About a year ago, I did a video talking about PortMaster. This is a tool that lets you play PC ports on a variety of different retro handhelds. And this tool runs on dozens of different handhelds and multiple custom firmwares too. So chances are, if you own a Linux-based handheld, there's probably a way to get PortMaster running on it. Now, in that previous video, I walked through the whole setup process and basically how to check whether or not your device is supported. So we're not going to cover all that stuff here today because the process is still the same. But over the past year, there have been a ton of new games added. I think at the time there were like 550 games on PortMaster, but now there are over 1,100. And this includes a variety of free-to-play games that you will download directly onto your device, and then others where you will take commercial files from like your Steam or GOG install and then put them on your card to allow you to play that full game too. So what I want to do in this video is a showcase of all of my favorite games that I play on PortMaster. I think there's like over 65 in this video that I tested over the past week or so. So this video is going to be a little bit different than my typical one because we're mostly just going to be talking through games, kind of hanging out and then showcasing a bunch that I think are a lot of fun. And like I mentioned, chances are if you have one of these cheaper handhelds, you can probably run PortMaster on it. And so this might be a great way to come up with new ideas of games that you can play. And so without any further delay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, as we get started, let's do a quick setup of how I'm going to be playing all these PortMaster games and why. For the majority of this video, I'm going to be using the Retroid Pocket 5. This one has the Snapdragon 865 chip inside of it, which works really well when it comes to these PC ports, and it's one of the rare Android-based handhelds that can also boot into Linux, which means that I'm running a custom firmware here called Rocknix, which does have PortMaster built into it, so that's why I'm playing all these games. Another high-end Android handheld that can run Rocknix are the Odin 2 devices, and I did a whole video about them, talking about the entire setup and whatnot, and why I think they are a really excellent fit. A lot of these PC ports are going to run at 16:9 aspect ratio, and so I really enjoy playing on the Retroid Pocket 5, but you could also use the Retroid Pocket Flip 2, same chipset, and the Retroid Pocket Mini version 2 as well. There are also a ton of retro handhelds that can use PortMaster as well, including the Anbernic RG-XX line. One of my favorites right now has been the Anbernic RG-34XX SP. This is the one that is essentially a Game Boy Advance SP. It has a 3:2 aspect ratio display, but this one has 2 GB of RAM, unlike most of the others, which only have 1 GB, and that does matter when it comes to playing some of these PC ports. And so these have been my two main PortMaster devices just because, the Retroid Pocket 5 can play everything. It's got a beautiful display, it's OLED. I mean, there are so many reasons why I love playing PortMaster on this, but sometimes you want something really like portable and pocketable, and so that's why I like the RG-34XX SP right now too, because I can throw this in my pocket and still play PC ports like Celeste or SteamWorld Dig 2 right there on the go, and I think that's just kind of a really cool concept. And so even though it's not an ideal way to play these games on such a small screen, it's still a very cool novelty. Now, like I mentioned before, I've already got a PortMaster video guide, so I'm not going to go over that again. I will leave it linked down below. It also has an accompanying written guide if you want to go that way as well. But essentially, this is how it works. You can go onto the PortMaster app. It's going to give you a list of all these different ports, and then you can install them right here on your device. Now, about half of these games are what they call ready-to-run ports, which means that as soon as you install them, you can just go back to your game interface and play them right then and there. They're mostly going to be freeware games or open source remakes, or they are games that have gotten permission from the developer to host on PortMaster too. The other half of the games are going to be commercial PC ports like Aliens vs. Predator. Essentially, someone has figured out a way to make these work on these handhelds too. So when you install this on PortMaster, you're just installing the batch or like shell files, and from there you will have to add your own commercial files from the actual game itself. Most of the time that's going to entail dragging and dropping your commercial files from your GOG or Steam installation, and the PortMaster website has instructions for every single game there. In fact, they've got this really comprehensive database that shows all 1,100 plus games, and you can sort them and filter them however you would like. And of course, I'll have all the stuff linked down below, but once you get into this database, you can kind of look around and see whether or not these games are going to be the ones that you want to play on PortMaster as well. Fair warning, there are so many here that it can get pretty daunting. So, you can filter it by like genre and, just kind of narrow it down a little bit more, or maybe just search for your favorite game name. Another great option is there's a Steam community playlist that will basically show you all the games that work on PortMaster that that are pulled from Steam directly. So when you open this up and say you're logged into Steam already, it's going to show you which of these games are already in your library. So there are a ton of different tools to get you started with PortMaster, starting with my guide as well as their own website, and then something like this handy Steam list. Anyway, here's a look at my Retroid Pocket 5, which is just running essentially just ports. Like, this is a build of Rocknix that's running off of my microSD card that is essentially devoted to playing PC ports. And so you can see I've got 75 games loaded right here. So I kind of treat this like a mini computer, and then I can go down here and just kind of browse through all the different games and then choose one and then launch it. Now, depending on the game, something like Shovel Knight, I'm just going to play it with a D-pad and face button. So I like to just play it as it is with my Retroid Pocket 5. However, if I'm going to be playing something that's more stick-based, just because of the way the sticks and the triggers are laid out, I prefer to use like a grip case with my Retroid Pocket 5. This is the official one here from Retroid, and this allows me to just get a little bit better of a grip and to use this like a more modern controller. So as I'm going through the video, you're going to see like sometimes I've got the grip on, sometimes I don't, and it all really just depends on the game. Either way, that's essentially my setup for PortMaster before we jump into the games. One other note is that the battery life on this can actually be pretty incredible. So in general, I would say I get somewhere between 6 and 8 hours of gameplay on the Retroid Pocket 5 when playing PC ports. Now, sometimes it depends on the port. For example, playing Morrowind does take up more battery than some of the other lighter games. But yeah, the average for me has been 6 to 8 hours of gameplay, which is really cool. The reason why I love this so much is that so many of my favorite indie games are available on PortMaster, and those are often the games I like to play the most on, say, for example, the Steam Deck. But obviously the Steam Deck is a lot bigger and not quite as portable, so it's really cool to have something this small that's still really fun to play all my favorite indie PC games. So now let's actually talk about the games themselves, and I kind of put them into different categories, so let's talk about that first. Now, if you are thinking about jumping into PortMaster, another thing to consider is that sometimes these games aren't going to work perfectly out of the box. It may require a little bit of tinkering around. The whole PortMaster team is just a community of volunteers, and not every single one of them owns every single device and every single custom firmware, and so sometimes, it just doesn't work as intended. A good example would be Binding of Isaac on the Retroid Pocket 5 running Rocknix. This one only runs on the bottom left corner of the screen, and it's kind of a small image. And this is a known bug. I've seen people talking about it on Discord and stuff. So yeah, this is one of those things where unfortunately I haven't been able to get this working fully. Other times I just was not successful in getting past like the menu or boot screen. Poke MMO was one that I was really looking forward to testing out for this video, but man, I tried it on a couple different devices, a couple different firmwares, and I couldn't really get this one to start up. Other games would have weird quirks to them that are just a configuration issue. For example, with SteamWorld Dig 2, when I press the A button, it would press the A and B button at the same time, which means that I could never get past the menu because as soon as I was confirming, I was also canceling by pressing that button. But the great thing about the PortMaster community is that there are a ton of people out there who are just willing to kind of help you out. And so there's a port help section within their Discord. I'll leave it linked down below. And there, I've posed a couple questions over the past few days, where I couldn't get a game to work correctly, like SteamWorld Dig 2. And most of these ports will actually spit out a log that's a text file that you can just upload into the Discord server, and they can look exactly at what happened with your device and then kind of help you troubleshoot. So in the case of SteamWorld Dig 2, I was able to just change one quick line of code, and that allowed the controls to actually work. And I uploaded my new updated file, and so everyone who has the same problem would be able to find it on the Discord too. So long story short, before we jump into any of this stuff, don't expect every single game to work perfectly, but the vast majority will, and there are solutions out there in case you run into a problem. So let's start by talking about those ready-to-run games. Those are going to be the free ones that I was talking about earlier. So essentially you can just download and install them directly onto the device and play them without adding anything else. Now when you navigate through the PortMaster list, it can be a little bit daunting just because there are like 1,100 plus games there now, but there's the ability to filter out to only those that are ready to run, which means that if you just want to look at the 500 plus games that you can play that way, then you can do that. And there are a lot of good classic games on there. 2048 is a good example. I think a lot of people are familiar with this puzzle game. It's one of the most downloaded PortMaster games of all time. For this game, you slide your blocks left and right, and when two blocks of the same number touch each other, they kind of smash together to be a larger number. From there, you just keep adding up those sums, which is essentially doubling it until you try to get to 2048. I'm pretty terrible at this game, but it is just a nice way to kind of relax, and of course, it's great that it's free. Another relaxing style of puzzle games for me are those match 3 games. Things like Bejeweled or puzzle quest from back in the day. So there is a free version of Bejeweled on here as well. It's called Free Gemmas. I love the fact that this one just looks so simple and old school, and so I find myself playing this one pretty often. Now, not all these puzzle games are relaxing. One that really screws me up is Super Hexagon. This is a freeware version of Super Hexagon, and man, this game just stresses me out. I am so bad at this game. I don't know what it is. I think it has to do with like the fact that these things are just coming at you all the time and you've got to try to spin to avoid them. Either way, yeah, this is a game that just gets my heart rate going, but I know a lot of people love it. And it is awesome that you can restart your game so quickly, so you can just keep going and going and going. Another free game is Apotris. This is essentially a Tetris clone, but has a really good look and feel to it. I really like the soundtrack as well, and so this is one of my favorite Tetris clones out there, and again, it's really cool that it's completely free. This one is also a lot of fun. This is called Super Mario War. So this is essentially like the old Mario Brothers game where you're kind of just competing against, Mario and Luigi, but this one has been amped up a bunch. You can play this multiplayer, like with other people connected to the device, or you can just play against a bunch of bots, and you're essentially just trying to stomp on the other person, like jump on top of them. And man, I don't know what it is about this AI, but it is really good. Like, it actually freaks me out sometimes where I'm like, man, it feels like I'm playing against a real person. Either way, it's a very simple game, and I love the kind of overall premise and look to it because it really just feels very cartoony, but is kind of sinister as well when you're trying to just basically murder the other guy by jumping on top of them. Now, sticking with more of these free-to-play games, another favorite is Maldita Castilla. This one is more of an action-adventure game and, reminds me a lot of Ghosts and Goblins, but isn't quite as hard, which I really love. It's got an old-school arcade look to it and very tight controls, which I think is a perfect match for this style of game. So yeah, definitely one worth checking out. This game is called RVGL. It's an open source port of Revolt, which came out in the late 90s. And one of the things I love about this is that it has excellent controls, but really great graphics as well for being an open source and free game. In fact, this is one of my favorite racers on the entire platform, including commercially available games. So yeah, this one's definitely worth checking out if you like racing games. Another one of my favorite free games is Stargrove Scramble. So this one has kind of a Yoshi's Island mechanic to it, where you pick up these eggs and then you throw them at the enemy. So very similar to, Mario World 2 or some of the other later Yoshi games. This one's also got some really nice tight controls, and I personally love these style of platformers too. And it feels like a commercially available game, but no, this one is 100% free. So definitely recommend this one too. Another one that a lot of people love is Rota. So this one is a rotation-based kind of puzzle platformer in that, as you walk around a corner, it'll rotate the entire world, and then you just kind of have to jump from platform to platform and, avoid spikes and pick up these additional medals. And it's a really unique trick that I've seen in other games too, but I think the graphics on this one are also very good. Again, it almost makes me feel like this should be a game that I have to pay for, but again, it's in the free list, and so I love the fact that you can just play this directly on your handheld and just download it right then and there. And that's one of my favorite things about these ready-to-run games is that they have a very low barrier to entry. You literally just shop for them on PortMaster and you choose which one to install, and generally they have very small file sizes, and then after they've downloaded and installed, you can just run them right then. And it is really fun to just kind of try one out based on, the thumbnail and the description, and sometimes it'll be really cool. An example of a game that I just found over this past week just by browsing and deciding to try it out is called Out of Ammo, and I think this one is actually really great. It's a vertical shooter game, and it kind of reminds me of Zero Ranger, but when you actually fire your core, it bounces around, kind of like when you're playing Breakout. And so it's kind of this weird mixture of, you're taking control of your airship and kind of moving that around and shooting, but you also have to be mindful of that core that's floating around because you have to hit it so that it bounces back up. So I love the idea behind this game and that it kind of mashes two genres together, and I literally just found it by browsing through PortMaster and deciding to give it a go. Okay, and finally, my last example of ready-to-run games is going to be Nazi Zombies. So this essentially is a decompilation of the Call of Duty Zombies games that you know from, back in the day, and I think they still have modern versions of it, but this is more focused on the old school stuff, but it's built in the Quake engine. So not only is it that old school version of Zombies where, the hordes just kind of keep going, but it has that really old school look to it. It kind of looks like it's from like the mid to late 90s. My only issue with this game is that in the options, games, if you try to invert the y-axis, where down is up and up is down, it doesn't actually work. And so I personally have to play with a y inverted axis when playing a first-person shooter game. So I haven't been able to get very far in this game just because the control scheme doesn't work for me. But if you just play regular style, I think you'll love it. Now, beyond just the free-to-play games, there are other categories. And the next one I want to talk about are going to be Nintendo 64 decompilations, because there are a ton of these. And essentially all you have to do is just grab your original ROM, then throw it into the folder. You might have to do a couple extra steps, but that's it. And now you can play upscaled and upgraded versions of your favorite Nintendo 64 games. This whole decompilation thing on PC and beyond started with Super Mario 64. Now, the original Mario 64 does not have a decompilation port on PortMaster, but we do have Render 96EX. This one is essentially Mario 64, but with a couple additional 3D models, including Mario himself, who has just a bit more of a rounded look to him. Regardless, this is essentially Mario 64, but with some really nice upgrades, like full widescreen support, and then also it runs at 60 frames per second, unlike the original Nintendo 64 game. And so yeah, this is one of my favorite ways to play Mario 64. And there are a bunch of other Nintendo 64 decompilation ports on there. The next famous one is Ship of Harkinian, which is going to be Ocarina of Time. So yes, you can play a decompilation version of this game as well. Same thing, where it's got full widescreen support and it'll run in 60 frames per second. There's also Ship of Harkinian 2, which is going to be Majora's Mask. Same thing here, really upgraded graphics, everything looks and plays well, and it's going to be running at 60 frames per second. One of my other favorites is Spaghetti Kart, which is Mario Kart 64, but this one again has got that widescreen support, which is really hard to implement in a lot of the emulator cores, but it's also a lot more accurate than some of those emulators too. So for example, you'll see the big teleprompter in that first level as you're going around. All those little things that I like about Mario Kart can be found here in this decompilation port. And it is so simple to set these up. You literally just drag and drop your Nintendo 64 ROM into the port folder. It's going to do the rest of the compilation process for you. Another game that looks fantastic is Starship, which is essentially Star Fox 64 decompilation. And yeah, this one also looks amazing. This is another one of those games that's a little bit tricky to emulate. Sometimes the lighting effects are going to be off when you try to emulate it on a Nintendo 64 emulator, but you don't really have to worry about that with the PC port. Everything looks and plays great. And finally, one other decompilation that's now on PortMaster is Perfect Dark. So if you wanted to play this game, which I think is actually a pretty excellent fit for the Retroid Pocket 5 when using that grip to be able to use, both analog sticks comfortably, yeah, this is actually a really great fit too. It's really hard to describe how good this game feels when it's running at a true 60 frames per second, so definitely worth trying out if you like this game. Now, beyond Nintendo 64 decompilation ports, there are some other commercial ports that I would put in a different category, in that they are mostly going to be archived games that you can also play here. A good example of that would be 3D Pinball, which was available on Microsoft Windows way back in the day. They call this one Space Cadet Pinball sometimes. And this one you cannot commercially buy, it's just not available. So what you have to do is find an archive of that game, or maybe if you've got it on an old CD lying around, and you got to pull the data file from that and then drop it into the PortMaster folder. So it does take a little bit of work to set up, but once you have it going, it is pretty cool to be able to play this 90s classic game. Another example would be Sonic 1, 2, and Sonic CD. Those all can be played on PortMaster as well, but in a widescreen manner. And I really love playing my Sonic games like this just because I can see more of the level. And when you're playing a game like this that runs, really fast, I love the fact that I can see more ahead as I'm running. And the way you get this game running is that you have to pull a data file from the Android version of this game, which is free to download. I actually made a video and guide about this many years ago, and I'll leave that link down below if you want to check it out, but it all works pretty easily. Another game that requires you to add your own files is going to be Cannonball. This is a port of Outrun, and it actually has a bunch of enhancements to it, including widescreen support and the ability to change your control scheme on the fly. The thing about this one is that you need to have the arcade ROM, and you have to drop all those arcade ROM files into the port folder first. So you might have to dig into a couple archives to find the files to get this running, but after that, yeah, it's going to work really well. Another good example is Streets of Rage Remake. This is a fan-made game that came out many years ago, but it's no longer available. You have to basically search for an archive in order to get the data files to drag and drop into the ports folder. All the instructions for each of these games can be found on the PortMaster page, so just go into that filtered list, search for the game, then click on it, and it'll tell you exactly how to add these files. My last example here is going to be AM2R, which is another Metroid 2 remake. This is another fan-made game that was taken down several years ago. I'm not sure if Nintendo took it down or if the guy himself took it down, but either way, you've got to find an old archive with the data files for this, and then once you have that, again, it's just a drag and drop, and this is a really fun game too. So before we ever got that 3DS remake of Samus Returns from the old Game Boy, this was the next best option, and a lot of people actually prefer this one over all of the others. I'm always blown away by how good this game looks considering that it was made by just one guy. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the commercial port games. These are the ones where you have to buy the game on Steam or GOG or somewhere else, and then drag and drop those files over. It's the same process where you have to go to the PortMaster website, then look up the game and see what the instructions are, and then follow that. And so what I'll do here is I'm going to start with my top 5 games, like the ones that I play the most when I'm playing PortMaster, and then we'll talk about all the other ones that I tested throughout this video, because I think there are a lot of hidden gems here. So now let's talk about my top 5 favorites, and these aren't really in any specific order, and I bet you can probably guess some of these if you've watched any of my other videos. Let's start with Celeste, which is one of my all-time favorite platforming games. This is a very challenging game. In fact, I've never actually beaten it, but I get a lot of comfort in just kind of playing through levels that I've already played through. This is a game where you die a lot. In fact, it kind of celebrates the fact that you die because you can see your death count as you go through the map. In addition, the way that you die is a very quick process, and so it kind of encourages you to keep going. And so even though I do not personally like very challenging games, like I find them to be a little bit frustrating, this is one of those games that actually does fit well with me and my playstyle. This game often goes on sale too, so many times you can find it for like $5, and I think it is 100% worth it. Another favorite for me is Balatro. This is a game I play on basically every platform I can, and it's great that it runs on PortMaster. This one is super easy to install. You literally just grab the Steam file and drop it in, and that is it. The only bummer about this one is that I haven't figured out a way to port over my save files in order to be able to use like some of the upgrades that I've earned on like the Steam version of the game. Instead, I just kind of have 2 different versions of Balatro running. Regardless, it's still a lot of fun to play, and I don't really mind starting from the beginning anyway. So yeah, if you haven't played Balatro, this is a game definitely worth checking out. Another game I haven't finished, but I love playing even if it's just the first level, is Shovel Knight. This is a very precise platformer, kind of like Celeste, but more like Mega Man in its overall structure. I would say the difficulty on this one is higher than Celeste, because when you die, not only does it take you back further in the game, usually just to wherever your last checkpoint was, but also you have to get back to the spot where you died to collect some of your earnings. So it has a bit of that Souls-like feel to it in that you do have to retread where you were, and patience is the key with this game as well. Either way, it's a beautiful game, and I think a lot of people know about this one, so let's move on to the next. Another big favorite of mine is UFO 50, just because of the sheer amount of content you can get in this game. As the name implies, there are 50 different retro games that you can play within this one game, and each of them have their own merit to them. Many of these games have an NES-style look and feel to them, which is, the system that I played growing up, and so I just love the idea of having these new NES-style games that I can play, and there's 50 different options to choose from. And I think that playing this on retro handhelds is a much better fit than trying to play it on something like your TV or a Steam Deck. It just makes a lot more sense to play it on a retro-focused handheld. And then finally, to round out my top 5 games that I've been enjoying the most over this week-long testing period, it's this one here. This is called Chicory: A Colorful Tale. At first, I thought this was a cozy game because I knew you did a lot of painting in it, and even though I owned it on Switch and PC already, I had never actually really tried it out. It turns out this is more like an adventure game, so it's kind of like a role-playing game because there's a story that you're following, but then also there are some action-heavy elements to it as well. So if I had to liken it to a specific retro game, I think it's more Zelda-like than the others. I really enjoy playing this game on the Retroid Pocket 5 because it has a touchscreen, which makes it really easy to paint with. You can just tap on the screen. You can also use the right analog stick to move your paintbrush around, but I find the screen to be a lot more intuitive. And so that's one of the reasons why I've been enjoying this game so much on the Retroid Pocket 5, is because that touchscreen capability really streamlines that process and makes it more enjoyable. So I'd recommend, if you do plan on checking out this game, do it on something that has a touch-capable screen. Okay, now that we've gone through our top 5, let's talk about just some of the many other excellent commercial ports that we have available on PortMaster. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason to this list other than I kind of lumped them together by genre. So first genre here is going to be like our action, adventure, and platform games. Our first example is Axiom Verge. This is one of the older indie classics, and this one has got a very platformer Metroidvania style to it. I'd say this one definitely has more of a Metroid than Vania feel, just because there's a lot of verticality to this game, so you're jumping a lot, and it has that sci-fi look and feel. What I like about this game is that it's got a pretty interesting storyline, so it makes me want to play it more, and then you have a variety of different guns that you can use, and some of them are going to be better in certain areas over others, and so it's a bit of a puzzle element to it as well. Speaking of puzzles, our next example is Braid, which is a puzzle-like platformer that is now available on PortMaster. This is one of my favorite games when it first came out back in like 2008 or 2009. I remember playing it on Xbox Live Arcade, and it's just a really interesting puzzle platformer. It's got a time travel mechanic to it. In fact, sometimes you have to rewind time in order to solve a puzzle, and so I really enjoyed that element to it. But it also has a really good story, and I don't want to get into the details about it because I think it's something you should experience, but I do love the fact that it kind of takes a typical narrative and turns it on its head. Either way, this often will make it to the list of people's favorite puzzle platformers, and I totally agree. This is one of my favorite experiences, and it's super cool that I can just load it up on PortMaster too. Next up, we have Bleed and Bleed 2. Both of these games are available on PortMaster, and these are action-adventure games that are kind of twin-stick shooters, but with a platformer kind of aesthetic to them. So in this game, you often will use your thumbsticks both at the same time, and then the shoulder buttons to jump, which is a little bit different of a mechanic, but it actually really works. This is another one of those games where you can swap out the weapons pretty quickly, and some of those weapons will work better on certain enemies. So there is a bit of a puzzle element to it as well, just because you have to make that perfect match. A more recent release is Pizza Tower. This one just came out a couple years ago, but it has been ported over on PortMaster, and this game is kind of crazy. Like, obviously the visuals are really weird looking, but it has that Wario Land kind of feel to it. So you really gain momentum as you're moving your character around, and it gets really fast and chaotic. And so I know a lot of people love this game. I've never been a huge fan of these Wario style games, but if you like those, then definitely check this one out. Moving on, we have Hyper Light Drifter, another one of my favorite indie PC games. This one has a bit of a Zelda feel to it in that you kind of go from room to room. It kind of feels, dungeon-esque, and you've got your sword and whatnot too. So yeah, this one's a really nice kind of modern implementation of that Zelda formula. Another favorite of mine is Guacamelee. This one is a Metroidvania in the fact that you level up your skills as you're playing through, and that opens up new areas. I like the combat in this one too because you hit the guys a bunch and then you can throw them into the other guy and that's going to knock them down, and so there is a lot of nuance to this as well that I really enjoy in terms of combat. Another Metroidvania game is Chasm. This one came out in 2018, and they actually say that it was inspired by Castlevania Symphony of the Night. The unique thing about this one is that you follow through a story like everybody else, but the way that you get through it, like the map itself, is procedurally generated, which means that as you play through it, it's going to be a unique experience every time. I love this whole concept because it makes it feel like every time you start up a new game, it's completely different, so it really ups that replayability. Like with most of these other games, I never really got to the point of beating it. I spent a lot of time testing as opposed to actually playing through games, but every time I pick it up, I really enjoy it. Now, most people already know about Super Meat Boy, but it is pretty cool that it's available on PortMaster as well. I would classify this game as being a precision platformer just because you have to time and, move your jumps correctly, but then also there is a bit of a speedrun element to it as well because it does have a timer going as you're playing, and it encourages you to play as fast as possible. This game is actually somewhat demanding, and so I found that something like the Retroid Pocket 5 gives me the smoothest gameplay experience. On some of those older or cheaper retro handhelds, sometimes it will slow down quite a bit. Up next, we have Steel Assault, which is an action platformer game that was distributed by Tribute Games, the same people that released the TMNT Shredder's Revenge game. I kind of think of this game as a mix between Bionic Commando and Mega Man, and it also has a very old school feel to it. You can see that the game is actually in 4:3 aspect ratio. So if you're looking for, an old school but new school style game, then this is one that's easy to recommend. Now earlier I talked about how you can play Sonic 1, 2, and Sonic CD in widescreen using the Android version of those games. And honestly, the only other 2D style Sonic game that I really enjoy is Sonic Mania, which you can also play on PortMaster. For this one, it's even easier to get ported. You can either pull the data file from the Android-based version of the game, or you can just pull it from your Steam file as well. It might be blasphemy to say, but I was never a big fan of Sonic 3 and some of the other later Sonic side-scrolling games, and so I love the fact that they went back to the basics with Sonic Mania, so this is one of my all-time favorites. Okay, I've got quite a few more action platformer style games. This is one of my favorite genres, and so this is the majority of the games I tested because I love these ones so much. First up, we have Time Spinner. I would consider this one to be an action RPG just because it is very story-based, and you do have a leveling up system as well. But the reason why I have it in this section is because I feel like the controls are so tight and action oriented that it actually is a really excellent platformer too. This is one of the many games that I actually did dedicated port videos about when I was first starting up my channel. So if you look on my channel, I've got a whole Time Spinner video talking about this game and how to get it running on some of the older handhelds. This was all way before PortMaster, and now it's a lot more streamlined, but it is cool to be able to see it playing on this platform too. And there are other ports that predate PortMaster as well, including Freedom Planet. This is another game where I made a whole dedicated video about too. This one kind of feels like the old school Sonic games because it's a side scroller and it gets going pretty fast, and you've got, all these hoops and loops to run through, but then also you've got a weapon so you can attack the enemies too, which I think is really cool. This one's also pretty neat because you've got multiple characters you can play as and a pretty good storyline, so definitely one to keep an eye out if you do like this style of game. Another old school port that predates PortMaster but has been added to the platform is Iconoclast. This one is a Metroidvania as well and has a nice vibrant and colorful look to it and very tight controls, so definitely one to check out too. Now earlier when talking about Steel Assault, I talked about Tribute Games, that's who helped publish it. Now Tribute Games also develops their own games, including TMNT Shredder's Revenge. This is a classic old school beat 'em up game, but with some more modern controls to it, and the ability to change out the different characters and also level them up. And when you port over the game, if you own the DLC, you can port that over as well, which will give you additional characters. So I think this is one of the best ways to play Shredder's Revenge. Another game developed by Tribute that also is available on PortMaster is Panzer Paladin. This is a weapons-based platformer game that uses a variety of different weapons, and each one has its own look and feel, and so this is also a surprisingly complex and deep action game. Okay, and finally wrapping up our action, adventure, and platforming section is going to be Owlboy. This is a game I would classify as being more of an adventure game with some light RPG elements to it, but I love the story-driven mechanics of this game and the fact that you're flying around as opposed to being limited by gravity. This game also gets pretty complex and deep near the end as you start introducing new characters and weapons, and so there's a lot under the hood for this game too. Now, in addition to all the other games that we were playing, I did try a couple other like puzzle and roguelites and sports games too. One good example is Luck Be a Landlord. This is actually kind of a precursor to Balatro. The Balatro developer said that they were inspired by this game. The game kind of feels like what Balatro does to poker, but with slot machines instead. It has a roguelike element to it in that you level up your deck as you move further and further along. And as you keep going up and up, you start earning more money, and you can add like multipliers and other elements that will kind of work like the jokers do in Balatro. The idea here is that you're supposed to earn enough money in a certain amount of rolls in order to be able to pay your landlord, and they keep upping the rent. So even though the game looks very simple, there's a lot going on here, and I think it's an excellent fit for a retro handheld just because it is a relatively simple mechanic that just keeps going and going. Another puzzle game that I haven't really played that much, but I do want to get into is Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon. This is a more recent port over to PortMaster, and it's one that I've owned on PC for a long time. I probably got it as part of a bundle, but I feel like this is also a very good fit for a retro handheld too. This is another game that looks to have a lot more under the hood in the fact that you've got like hit points and you can do chains and stuff like that, and so even after a few minutes of playing it, I realized this is a game that could really suck me in. Another game that somewhat fits in this category is called Doodlings. They call this one a sports-like. It kind of feels like a mixture between Rocket League and foosball, and you've got two opposing teams and you're trying to bounce a ball into one of the other goals. This is actually made by a guy I know named Gardner Bryant, and he actually used the voice cast of some of my friends, like from the Nerd Nest podcast. So like Bill and Rich actually give commentary as you're playing, and I think that's pretty funny. So it is kind of cool to, hear my friends talking as I'm playing this game, and I think it's well worth it on its own. Now, I already own this game on Steam, but I wasn't able to use my Steam files to get the port working. I had to buy the Android version of the game and then drag and drop that one over. So I ended up having to buy this game twice. If you are looking to pick it up, up, then make sure you follow the instructions because you only need the Android version to get it working on a retro handheld. Okay, next up we have what I'm considering to be like cozy and RPG games and just kind of mashing these all together. And I think the best starting spot is actually Garden Story. The overall look and pacing of this game kind of feels a little bit relaxed and cozy to me, but it does have some action RPG elements to it later on in the game where you actually fight enemies and stuff. And that kind of feels like a Zelda game at that point, but I think it's a pretty good mix between those two. My only complaint about this game is that the text is a little bit small, so I don't think you'd be able to play this on, say, for example, a 3.5-inch screen. It needs something a little bit bigger, like on the Retroid Pocket 5. Now, PortMaster has a bunch of different Minecraft or Minecraft-like games on it, but one recent addition is actually the Java version of Minecraft. This can play all sorts of versions of Minecraft. I'm not very well versed in all this stuff, but I had my son kind of walk me through it. So it can play things like, your mods and Forge and all that kind of stuff, or just the regular vanilla versions too. There are only a certain amount of the versions that will actually work, but if you're looking for like a full PC version of Minecraft, yes, you can play it. I would recommend using a more high-powered device like the Retroid Pocket 5 just because it can chug a little bit, and if you want to get that full experience, you probably will need a bigger screen. However, if you've got a retro handheld, you want to play one of the other Minecraft versions, you can just search for the word Minecraft on the PortMaster website, and there are like 4 different ones to choose from. One issue I found in my testing with Minecraft is that I had a little bit of stick drift with going to the right side. Like every time I tried to move, the character would just continue to move to the right, and so I'm not sure what's going on here. I may have to remap the controls, but otherwise, yeah, it looks and plays like Minecraft. Now, one game that's a little bit easier for me to get behind is Stardew Valley. I find this one just to be a bit more relaxing and not as intimidating as Minecraft, which just has a lot going on. The great thing about this one is that it is the PC version of Stardew Valley, which I know a lot of people prefer over the Android version. So I know a lot of people really enjoy this PortMaster one. I think this is actually the most downloaded game on PortMaster of all time. Now, moving over to more RPG games, one game that I'm really happy is on PortMaster and I really want to get the time to actually play through it is To the Moon. This game was originally made with RPG Maker back in, I think, like 2011, so it's been around for quite a long time. And I remember buying it on Steam around that time too. I've had it forever, but I've never actually played through it, but one of the things I really like about it is that it's very story driven, so there is not a lot of action to it. It's really just a matter of experiencing and playing through that game. So I like the fact that it doesn't have like your typical battles or inventory or anything else like that. It literally is just kind of playing through a book. The graphics and everything have definitely aged over the past 15 years, but that's part of its charm as well. And so, yeah, I think one of these days I just need to hunker down and play it. If you have played through this game, let me know in the comments down below and tell me how you liked it. Another old school RPG is Diablo, and you can play the first Diablo on this machine. It's actually pretty easy to run. It's been ported over many times. It's hard to believe this game came out in 1997. It's almost 30 years old, but it still kind of holds up. I know a lot of people play like the PS1 port of this game, but I think this PC port is superior just because it has full widescreen support. I didn't really get into Diablo until like Diablo 4, so I am way behind the times when it comes to playing these games, but if you like playing the first one, I think this is an excellent way to do it. Now, one recent addition to PortMaster is Open Morrowind, so you can play Elder Scrolls 3 here. I think it's pretty awesome. Now, I don't know a ton about this game, but I do know that you can also install mods with this if you want. There's a lot of discussion on the PortMaster Discord about it, so if you want to learn more about that stuff or get some recommendations of the best mods to use with this game, then you can definitely find that there. This definitely feels like an old school PC game that is running on a handheld. You know, sometimes the text is really small and the action itself just feels very kind of PC gamery from, back in the 90s and early 2000s, but there's no mistaking the fact that this is a monumental game that was influential for a lot of games that are out right now. I personally got started with Oblivion on the Xbox 360, but I can definitely feel that DNA with Morrowind as well. It is worth noting this is a game that will have some performance issues with those cheaper handhelds, so even though you may want to play it on your small, cheap $50 handheld, you will experience some slowdown here and there. But it is still pretty incredible that this game is playing at all on something that is really designed to play stuff like Super Nintendo games. Okay, finishing out our RPG section is going to be Undertale. Both this game and Deltarune are available on PortMaster. So if you like playing these games, you can play the ports here. My son, who is now 16, really loved this game about 5 years ago. He played through the whole thing. He used to read up on their wiki pages and all that kind of stuff. And so if you do want to kind of dive into that world, you can do that on a handheld right now. Our next group's only got a few games. This is going to be driving style games. So we're going to start with Victory Heat Rally. This one kind of feels like a mix between Daytona USA and Super Mario Kart, and it's got a lot of drifting and whatnot, but still kind of has those big circuit laps too. I really like the cartoony aspects of all this, and you can upgrade your car over time. It's actually a pretty deep PC game, and I love the fact that it's been ported over to PortMaster. I think it looks great. The only other games in this group are kind of driving and kind of not. They're the Grand Theft Auto games, so they have Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City ports available. For these, you're going to need to own the original games on Steam, not those like remastered or remade ones, but the old school ones, and I just so happen to have bought them back in the day. So it is a bit tricky to find the game files to be able to play these games, but once you have them up and running, it's pretty great. The game is going to play in a full widescreen 16:9, it has an upscaled resolution, it looks really good, and plays super smoothly. So depending on the handheld you have, this might be the best way to play these Grand Theft Auto games. And then finally, our last section is going to be more first-person shooter style games, and for these you're going to see that I will be using the Retroid Pocket grips the entire time, just because it makes it a lot more playable. Now there are a lot of old school games that you can play on here, you know, the Duke Nukems and Doom and Quake, all those are going to be available, and I think my favorite among all of those to play on these handhelds is Quake 3 Arena. When I first joined the Navy about 25 years ago, my roommate used to play this game all the time. This was like his Friday night fun, was to play this game online. And so it's very nostalgic to me to be able to play this game again, even if I'm just playing against bots. It's just a really fun experience. But of course, beyond just those old school boomer shooters, you've got a lot of other options. For example, you have Half-Life, the original, and this one plays great. This one has been ported over many times in different ways, but it works really well within PortMaster, and it's a very seamless experience. This is also the second most downloaded game on PortMaster of all time. So yeah, a lot of people have been enjoying Half-Life on their devices. A lot of other classic first-person shooter games from this era are also available on PortMaster. For example, we have Doom 3. This is a game that I actually bought back in the day and never played through because it just scared the crap out of me. It was so dark that I felt like you could only play it in the dark so that you could see everything, but then by turning off all the lights, I would freak myself out sitting in front of my computer monitor. And so yeah, I have never gotten very far in this game, but I don't know, it's a pretty good fit for a retro handheld. Another similar game to that is Aliens vs. Predator. It's one that was just a little bit too scary for me to play back in the day, but yes, it's on PortMaster too. Another similar game to that is Return to Castle Wolfenstein. This one has a very dark sort of look to it, but thankfully I don't find this one quite as scary. It's just a bit more puzzly, and that's kind of how all the Wolfenstein games have always been. And then finally, the last game in the showcase is Medal of Honor Allied Assault. This is actually one of my favorite all-time PC games from back in the day. I remember playing this game on my Gateway PC back in the day, right when I first got my first barracks room when I had joined the military, and it was just so cool. You know, I think everyone really enjoyed like Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers at the time, and it was cool to be able to play a game that kind of felt like you were in World War II. Obviously, over the years, we saw a lot of other games come out, you know, the Medal of Honor series and Call of Duty and so on, but nothing really captured that whole essence like Allied Assault did for me back in the day. I will say that playing the port of this game doesn't quite live up to the memories that I have of this game. I think this is something that's probably going to be better suited to playing on an actual computer as opposed to a smaller handheld, but it is still really cool to have a portable version of this game. If anything, this inspired me to maybe install it on my computer and play it again like back in the day. It's one of the few first-person shooter games that I actually played with a keyboard and mouse because I didn't own a gamepad back then. And yeah, I think I kind of wanted to do the keyboard and mouse thing again with this one. Anyway, that's all I really got for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I just kind of wanted to hang out and talk about games, and I thought that PortMaster would be a good way to do that. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.